that involved the city in the process from the beginning to the end. And what we created was where instead of having 1 or 2 developers that hung out at City Hall, we ended up with 30 developers, more than 30 developers, many of them very small, who came in and started doing infill projects. Now, there's a lot more to this story, and what is our, we have food coming. I'm the only thing between you and eating food. How much time? 10 minutes? Okay. Okay. All right. So we wanted to have the city get rich. The idea was instead of being about poverty, that we would be about development and about the city becoming stronger and stronger. And to do that, we changed the focus from how can you bail us out of our misery to how can you add value. And so then we'd run into things that looked like they were impossible obstacles. Like we had a freeway on the north side of the downtown that separated the north side of the downtown from the rest of the downtown. And it carried 35,000 cars a day. How could you possibly live without it? Who could ever tear it down? But we decided that it was depressing value. The buildings that used to be there next to it were gone. It was all surface parking lots. So your car could be next to the river that ran through the city and the surface parking lot, gazing out over the river throughout the day. I mean, it was ridiculous. So the DOT said, well, you can't do it. Besides, we're going to be resurfacing it soon, and that'll give it another 20 years of life, which they went ahead and did that. They spent $12 million, and it had 20 years of life. But we didn't give up. We organized the property owners in the downtown. At first, they said, "You want to do what?" It was totally counterintuitive. The freeway. Oh, well, isn't that how everybody who shops in my store rides in on the freeway? They could never get here without it. Actually, they could get there without it. And we went through a lot of it. I'll talk about that more tomorrow, so we don't have to do it tonight. But anyway, finally, some of the biggest business people in the downtown, Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance and so forth, they're telling the governor, listen to Norquist, he's right, let's tear down that ugly freeway, let's get rid of it. And so we finally did. We got rid of the freeway, and it added more value to the property. One 28-acre site that had been the rail yard for the Schlitz Brewing Company, over $750 million of development, housing units in that, in 6 different sections. We put it in 6 sections so it wasn't one developer, so it wasn't just a monoculture with one developer, but you had 6 different developers following a common plan, a pre-coded form-based code that was put in place. And it's fabulous. People love it. They love being there. They enjoy it. Urban life at its best. And a lot of things that we did like that, but everything was around this unifying thing about what adds value to the city. So you could be an environmentalist, you could be a labor union member, you could be a crusty business person, or a cranky trust fund baby who hated change. You could be any kind of person you wanted to be, but the unifying thing was what makes the city better, what adds more value. And that's, when I look at Wilmington, I've been here twice, so I'm not an expert on Wilmington, and if I was an expert on Wilmington, you wouldn't invite me to be here. It's the fact that I'm an outsider. But, in looking at it, you have the fabulous history, the historic architecture, the great location on the river, near the ocean. There's all kinds of natural things going. But then you look at some of the stuff that gets done and has been done. It's not that much different than other places. Building bridges where you can't walk on the bridges. That's not a good idea. Any great city, you should be able to walk over the bridges. And someday you'll fix that. And I look around at the outer parts of the city, and you have you know, the typical American style sprawl. But it doesn't happen by accident. I'm sure those are coded setbacks. I mean, you can see all the buildings are set back, and then there's no sidewalk, because who would want to walk next to an 8-lane street with all the built environment is, you know, 40, 50 meters at least away from the street. So, you know, these are all the typical mistakes that can be fixed. You can retrofit the sprawl, and when new stuff gets built, it could be built on streets and blocks instead of cul-de-sacs. You can, but it's hard to do the right thing. So you have to have the confidence to challenge things that are outside that look like, oh, we can't do it. North Carolina DOT says we can't do it. Okay, well then we won't do it. And what were we thinking of anyway? No, you have to challenge it. You have to challenge it. And I've just, you know, we went to this transit transfer point, and the guy, a very nice guy, and it's green. The urinals are green for those of you that aren't mad. Just trust me on that. You know, the building materials are green, and the perks and the permeable surface and all that stuff. But the whole idea of it, it's not Wilmington's fault, it's just the way this works. The big transit cities like Chicago and New York get these big checks to help them with expanding the subway systems and all that. And so the medium and small sized cities have to get something too, so they get transfer stations. There are no bus transfer stations in New York City. And there are none in Chicago, except for at the Howard Street L site, and it's the most unpleasant place to stand in Chicago. You know, the whole idea, my old hometown when I was a little kid, when I was in 2nd grade and 3rd grade, Muncie, Indiana, they had this Louis Kahn style concrete transfer station in the middle of of what was actually a kind of a nice downtown. They just ruined it. It's like they dropped a bomb on it. And it has no utility at all because you could transfer on the streets before the transfer station was there. So here's this transfer station separated from everything around it. It's the specialist, the transit transfer station specialist has decreed that these things are built all over the country. And so they are, you know, and this one is one of the prettier ones I've ever seen. So you got, but it's disconnected from everything. You don't need it. It ought to be at a destination. You know, one of the malls could be the transfer point. Maybe the mall wouldn't like that because the people that ride the bus might show up at the mall. I don't know. But actually, the malls would be better off if they had bus service, and if there was more, if the transit system got better over time, the people that don't have to ride it would start riding it. Like in Toronto, you're there at 10:30, 11, 12 at night, there are people with tuxedos riding on the subway system. I had that happen to me in DC actually. I went to Bill Clinton's inauguration in 1992, and my wife and I got on, and we had our tuxedos on. We got on in Bethesda where our parents lived, and we're riding the subway. And every stop, more people with tuxedos and formal dresses were getting on. We finally got down to Woodley Park, and some guy with just a T-shirt and a leather jacket and blue jeans got on, and he saw the people with tuxedos. We said, "No, come on in. Black tie option." But I mean, that's how good transit can get, if you know. But anyway, so my final point on this is just that cities are complex, and that's the greatest virtue maybe about cities is that they're complex. That's why, you know, if the best restaurants are in the biggest cities, also some of the worst restaurants in the biggest cities, but you have a lot of restaurant choice. You know, you find, but if you go to Minot, North Dakota, you know, you have Buffalo Bob's Steakhouse, McDonald's, and Burger King, but there's not a lot of choice. But if you're in a city, so for 100 miles around Wilmington, this is the best place to be, the most interesting place to be. And it's the complexity of the city that makes it interesting. And for the last 60, 70 years, there's been these intrusions, whether it's the formulaic transit transfer station that comes out of Washington that drops into your city, or the overbuilt highway system. You shouldn't build grade-separated highways in densely populated, complex grid systems in cities. They don't do it in Europe. You know, there aren't freeways in the middle of cities in Europe because the engineers and the traffic planners knew it would create more congestion than it resolves. It's a stupid thing to do. In Paris now, they have a freeway in the right bank of the Seine. That's the one where Princess Di was killed. And they're taking it out, even though it's out of sight, even though it would really be hideous if it was above the ground. They're taking it out because it creates congestion at the nodes. It actually causes the grid system in Paris to malfunction where it is. So they're taking it out. It's a net negative, so get rid of it. And the same thing is true of separate use zoning. The transit thing is actually it's transit station as separate use zoning. It's a suburban form, taking an urban thing like transit and then turning it into something that's suburban. Not even suburban, really exurban. And so it doesn't belong. So what needs to happen in this town? I mean, there's a lot of things that need to happen that I am not going to talk about, so because other people know more about it than I do. But what do I think should happen in this town? I think you should look at your zoning code, you should look at your building regulations and see if they add value. If they're focused on adding value to neighborhoods, you know, it doesn't all have to, that doesn't mean your zoning code has to produce pre-Civil War historic streets everywhere in the city. But it does need to produce something that's good for the people who live there, that gives them a neighborhood that has lasting value, a neighborhood where they can walk, a neighborhood where children can be happy, where they can at least shop for some things that are close to their home. You know, a zoning code ought to do things that create a valuable city that's useful to its citizens. The street regulations should be focused on not just battling congestion. That's the wrong goal. It's the wrong goal, and it's really the wrong goal if it's the only goal. And unfortunately for most DOTs, and it's probably true of North Carolina DOT, it is their main focus. How can we battle congestion, reduce congestion? Beware what you ask for. I mean, you know, you look at all of the really rich cities in the country, you know, and the rich places in those cities, like Michigan Avenue in Chicago is hopelessly congested. Fifth Avenue in New York is congested. Market Street in San Francisco, guilty of congestion. You know, Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills, congested. Are they planning on widening Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills? No. It's a 44-foot street with Cobra lights and fabulous retail on each side. And the private realm. They don't have fancy benches or anything. I'm glad you got rid of your park benches in
Front Street.
Market Street. Front Street, yeah. But, you know, all of these prosperous places have one thing in common. They're congested. And the federal government and the state DOTs are in a never-ending battle against congestion. And if they do what if they follow the strategy that they have, if it's completely implemented, you can see the result. They win. There is less congestion. Look at Detroit. Every freeway that the Michigan DOT ever dreamed of is built. All the streets are widened. Their main streets, the city of Detroit hasn't even figured out how to manage their own streets. Like Gratiot, which is one of their major streets. You can't park on. And Woodward Avenue, which is another major street, you can't park on it during rush hour, in the morning or in the evening. Even though they have empty storefronts all over the place. That's why they have empty storefronts, because you can't park in front of the store. It's not that people think they're actually going to get the spot right in front of the store. It's just that they imagine that they might.